As a behavior consultant specializing in dysregulated nervous systems and aggressive behavior, these are the 5 biggest mistakes I see. One of the biggest mistakes I see is focusing on obedience and control. We often approach behavior concerns initially with the idea that if we can better control the dog, or if we can get the dog to obey us, the behavior problems will be resolved. And there are a few reasons this doesn't work. The first is that behavior is a symptom. So if we're trying to address the behavior itself head on, sort of like trying to put a Band-Aid on a wound that needs like antibiotics, careful care, stitches, and then forgetting to look at how the wound occurred in the first place so that we can prevent it from occurring again. Additionally, one of the most important parts of behavior work is creating safety. Often these problem behaviors are happening because the dog doesn't feel safe. They have an anxiety disorder, a trauma disorder, a hyperarousal disorder, meaning that their sympathetic nervous system is easily engaged. They are often baselining with stress levels that are higher than ideal. And aiming for obedience misses that completely and can actually make the dog feel even less safe. Focusing on us having control is likely to increase anxiety. And obedience and control can very easily rupture our relationship that we're aiming for to be safe people for our dogs. And it's unfortunate because in some schools of dog training, because this is a completely unregulated field and people can say whatever they want, a lot of folks sell the story that by being in control and removing your dog's agency, that will somehow make them trust you more, and then their behaviors will decrease. And that's just not grounded in any type of evidence. This can even show up in positive reinforcement training, though. If we're focusing on literal positive reinforcement, we're focusing on operant conditioning, when again, this is a feelings issue, this is an emotions issue, an associations issue, a safety issue. The second big mistake I commonly see early on is taking a non-holistic approach to stress reduction. We as the humans tend to be most focused, rightfully so, on the behaviors that impact us the most. They are the most aversive to us, the most upsetting to us. They are the ones that seem the most unsafe to us. It is not uncommon for me to have clients very politely questioning why I'm asking about their dog's stress levels at the vet or in the car, or their inability to settle and sleep through movement and noise in the house when they're here asking me about resource guarding or reactivity on walks. But these things are all connected. They're not happening in a vacuum. If your dog does not feel safe in the house, or if they're constantly jumping up the stress scale in the house, or if they are not getting sufficient sleep, or if they don't feel good in their body, if their enrichment needs are being met inappropriately, that impacts their ability to handle stress out on the walk. That impacts their ability to bounce back from stressors, which is going to influence how long that negative event is going on for you both, and how stacked they are when the next stressor comes along. In our Behavior Bites webinar trio, the entire first 2-hour webinar is all about holistic stress reduction. It is that important. Another big mistake I see folks make early on is ignoring unwanted behaviors. And this is one of those things that can seem harmless, right? We're not punishing the dog, we think. But I would argue that this is, in fact, punishing for the dog. And if we're saying that safe relationships involve two beings who are emotionally attuned, where we are able to be emotionally responsive to our dogs, where they feel seen and heard, and like we are someone who can support them when they're saying, hey, I'm uncomfortable, help, or I need this, help, whether that's to go outside and go to the bathroom or to get help calming down and feeling safer. Not only can we see increasing frustration, and not only can we see that our dogs then don't get their needs met because they're not asking in a way we find appropriate. And not only does that directly impact agency, the belief that one has control over their environment is very much tied to the belief that one can be heard when they communicate and understood. But it's also going to rupture our relationship. And remember, safe people, safe relationships is a huge part of feeling safe for social creatures like dogs and humans. If the way the dog is communicating is a problem, if it's unsafe, or if it's increasing their stress, or if it's aversive to us, that's something that we can pretty easily change. But we don't want to change it in the moment when the dog is requesting something. Let's meet the need first, and then learning can happen separate from that. The fourth common mistake I see folks making early on is training over threshold. And we can look at this big picture and little picture. So big picture, we may be setting up our dog to work with their trigger. We may or may not have that setup done in such a way so that our dog is under threshold in that moment. If we're skipping out on that holistic stress reduction, our dog still isn't going to be in the best learning brain they could be. They are not going to learn and retain and remember and execute as well as they could be otherwise, even if they're under threshold in that moment. Remember, dysregulated dogs tend to have a baseline that is higher than ideal. So often, even at their most relaxed by default at the beginning of the process, they are still more stressed than is healthy or ideal. And then, of course, we may be acutely training over threshold. We see this a lot when we are of the mindset that the behavior needs to happen so we can correct it. If the unwanted behavior, which again is a symptom of distress, at least when we're talking about dysregulation, fear, anxiety, frustration, but this goes for excitement too, we have set up the environment incorrectly. We don't want to punish the dog for having that response. We want to get them out of that situation, help them feel safe again from their perspective, not from our perspective, and then rearrange the environment so they can be successful. This can happen even if we already know that we're not relying on setting the dog up to fail. Sometimes stress can look subtle to us. We mistake a dog who is avoiding for a dog who is ignoring. We mistake a dog who is self-regulating and trying to cope for a dog who is, we think, just engaging with the environment. And the ability to tell the difference is really subtle. It's really nuanced. It's easier to do once you know what you're looking for, and the more practice you get, it becomes second nature, but it is vitally important. So you can think you're training under threshold and find that your dog is actually still higher on the stress scale than is ideal for learning, and that's going to slow down your progress. It's going to impact the dog's perception of safety. It can actually be making things worse instead of better. And then the fifth common mistake that I see people make initially is to discount the role of how the dog feels physically in their body. It is very common for folks to believe that just because their dog has been to the vet recently and had an exam and had their annual blood work, and because they're not seeing overt signs of distress like throwing up or limping, that the dog must feel fine in their body and that health issues must not be contributing to the behavior. 5A, or 5.5, I will say related to this, I sometimes see folks who think that if they can find the physical health issue, they will not need behavior therapy, and they're then put off behavior therapy while they search for this physical issue. It falls under this idea that we should always rule out physical health issues first, but that's not quite the case. And that's because ruling out physical health issues isn't a thing. It's very common, perhaps you've had this lived experience, to go to the doctor and say, I don't feel well in my body. Something is wrong. Perhaps something is very wrong, but the tests all come back clean. And dogs can't necessarily directly tell us what symptoms they're experiencing. How often do we not feel well in our bodies and just push through? We go to work anyway. We keep behaviorally doing the things. And there are a myriad of things that wouldn't pop on our blood work or a physical exam if we weren't saying a word to the doctor about our symptoms. If our symptoms were something not able to be observed in the doctor's office. If our symptoms were mainly behavioral. How much pain or discomfort would you need to be in before someone could tell just by looking at you? Not always, but often, this can be a longer journey of figuring out what is going on with the dog. And sometimes it works out really nicely, and it is something that we can find on exam or in routine blood work. But there is no test for pain. And our dogs can't tell us directly how they're feeling in their body. And so this is often a mystery that we have to unwind. It can often take multiple vets, different specialists, a myriad of diagnostics or empirical testing. But it's very common that I have folks go down that rabbit hole and they find significant things. But here's the thing, those dogs still tend to need behavior therapy. And behavior therapy is about way more than just working directly with the trigger. So I would encourage folks to start behavior therapy even if you suspect pain. There is a lot of valuable data and coping skills and support to be offered there. They're concurrent journeys, not consecutive.